Welcome to the Morning Investor podcast. My name is Finn Schlichtenbach. I'll be your host, and today we're going to be talking to Miroslav. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for
Excellent.
having me.
Yeah, no, pleasure. So tell me about yourself. You're a venture capitalist. You started out in venture capital quite recently.
hmm
Kind of tell me about how you went from graduating as a finance major, right,
Correct. Yeah.
and to kind of like pursuing your goal of getting into like venture capital.
Okay. It's a pretty deep question.
Pretty deep question.
Uh, so before even Bentley, I started a startup in high school, which is Lingo, and I always knew that I wanted to be in startups and then eventually be in VC. My dad was an activist investor in Czech Republic,
Okay, cool.
and he always said like you have to be in the business, not just invest in a business. And
Right.
so since like 12 years old, that was my dream. And yeah, I figured Bentley was the better choice because I already felt like I had entrepreneurship locked in, and Bentley taught you the basics from freshman year, right?
Right.
You're doing accounting freshman year, you're doing finance freshman year, and you're going through all the business gen eds. And I really wanted to start doing internships, but also learn things to do on for my business um,
So what did
from freshman year.
what did your business do specifically that you started in high school at Lingo? Like,
It taught English to Spanish speakers online.
okay,
So if you think about us in the US learning a second language,
yeah,
it's a hobby, right? It's a nice to have. In Mexico and Colombia, if you have English, it means that you're going from the back of the house to the front of the house,
hmm,
and you're probably increasing your salary by 50%.
yeah,
The problem is that you have English teachers in those countries that are teaching English but don't know how to speak English.
hmm,
So you end up with really bad pronunciation issues, and you have technically amazing students that know way more than I do about English, but you wouldn't know that they can speak well. So that was the whole idea, was to bring that in. There was actually almost a contract with the Mexican army to teach them English, which was like a $30 million ARR deal. And then something happened with the price of oil, and basically the whole economy was like, nope, we're not doing anything new. And
shoot,
now I'm in a different world. Yeah.
okay, wow. So you're at Bentley, you're pursuing Lingo as a business, right?
Yeah, I was
Still,
doing that from basically senior year of high school up until senior year of college.
okay, and so then the deal with the Mexican government tanks,
Yeah, yeah.
and so now you're graduating. So what came next?
I basically said I had a huge imposter syndrome,
Yeah,
and I was like, I need to work for a real company.
sure,
And so I found Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, and I was a R&D finance person there. So anything between uh, first discovery stage up until clinical or preclinical studies before it goes into humans. And that was really fun because I got to think about finance 5 to 10 years in really big chunks, basically, not just quarter by quarter.
right. And so life science, you were drawn to that. Like that seems kind of like a big 180, right? From language
Yeah.
and linguistics to
I think as an entrepreneur, you just see opportunities, and,
opportunity,
and
right?
that's where you go. And then eventually you find something that you're super passionate about and also do that. But uh, I think Zynga was just an opportunity. My co-founder was really good on the on the language side, but had no business acumen, and that's where I was able to help.
Very cool.
Uh, with biology, that was just my favorite subject in high school, right? So I just actually took a bunch of classes for biology or for science here as well, and that helped me get into the pharmaceuticals. And actually, Peter Tsai's financial modeling class saved me on my interview because I think the second youngest person at in that finance department at Regeneron was like 32 at the time.
Mhm.
They never hire straight out of college. So the hiring manager was like, hey, there's this 90-minute basically Excel test, model out what Regeneron's going to do with each of their drug pipelines and like how that's going to translate to the stock price.
Right.
And she definitely thought that was going to fail that. And I basically just memorized Peter's Tsai, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do all this stuff, and it worked out eventually, basically.
I heard through the grapevine that there was another professor that you took a liking to while you were at Bentley University, Phil Ullman.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I actually am taking him at the moment during the semester. I have him
He's old
for
school.
he is very old school, but well liked,
Yes,
also well respected.
yes.
He's a hard grader, but people respect him.
I think you're seeing a theme here for me,
Yeah.
which is thinking far into the future. So Phil, uh, Mr. Ullman, does does project finance, right? Which
Mhm.
is thinking in decades or multiple year increments. At Regeneron, that was the same thing. And in VC, you're also thinking, a fund usually lasts about 10 years from start to exit. So I always liked the future.
Interesting. Okay, so you're working in R&D now, and so you made that transition from like the biotech world over to Momenta, right? When that was 9 months ago,
No, I went back to my startup.
so you went back to your startup. Okay, so what was the
I
decision
I
there?
got really burned out.
Okay,
I was my manager prided herself that we were the smallest team but did the most work. So that resulted in like 80 to 100 hour average weeks, and that was my first job. So I didn't know any better. I was
mhm.
like, if she says I suck, then I probably suck. Uh, but I learned a ton of stuff in a year and a half, and then I burnt out. And actually, my co-founder for Zlingo said, "Hey, I want to retire. Let's try to sell this thing." So I went back to Florida to sell the startup.
And so who did you exit to?
It was a customer.
Customer. Oh wow.
It was a
Okay.
customer in Colombia, and basically a university that wanted to have this software proprietary for them.
So the business you started in high school exited.
Yeah,
So now,
not for much though.
well, it's still an exit, right? So then you have the exit. You're no longer working in biotech. You're probably so like what was going through your head at that time? Like you just sold your company.
Yeah.
Like was your head at with just kind of like the next steps?
Honestly, I felt like I was really behind.
Really
Yeah, yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Because I went to a private high school.
Hmm.
Uh, my dad did really well, so a lot of the peers there were doing really well.
Sure.
And so I was like, okay, well, if I'm trying to match my dad, I'm already behind.
Right.
And now I sold this company, and now I'm not doing anything for like 6 months.
Hmm.
So that was kind of weird for me.
Okay.
But I think those sabbaticals are really important because it allows you to kind of think about what you're gonna do.
Like reflect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like if you have a job and then you go straight into another job, or you try to find like one really quick, usually you end up in the wrong place. I think
That makes
because you
sense.
just take the first like opportunity with the
Opportunity,
best
right?
money.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So after your like sabbatical,
Yeah, yeah.
what like
Uh,
where did you go from there?
so at Zlingo, one of the things was that books were our biggest competitor, right?
Right.
And I felt like the stickiness of books, which is hardware essentially, was really cool to have as a part of a company, right? Like uh, software can get replaced pretty easily most of the time, but once you have hardware somewhere, it's pretty sticky. And we actually, what we would do is we would give crazy discounts on a 4-year contract because we found out that after year 4, a lot of the books kind of left the school system for
Okay.
English.
Yeah.
And then we were very difficult to replace because they couldn't go back to books easily. Okay.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
So my first thing was like, okay, I need to find a company that's mixing software, data, and hardware together to create a solution. And that's how I got to Smart Sense, which is here in Boston.
Okay. And so how big was that team when you joined?
70 probably.
70, and now it's a little bit bigger, right?
60 probably actually. And now it's a little bit over 100, I believe.
Okay.
But the revenue went up pretty good,
Pretty
the
drastically.
recurring. So the whole idea was they were still doing kind of hybrid one-time revenue where you buy the hardware and then a recurring tail. And the whole transition was to make it a full recurring
Like
SaaS
SaaS
business
business. Yeah.
where you're managing the services and the hardware,
Gotcha.
which I think everyone is doing now. SmartSense monitored critical environments in pharmacies,
Okay.
groceries, and food. So they were monitoring temperature and humidity using sensors to make sure that drugs and food are safe.
Like they don't go like bad during the
Right.
transport or just like on the shelf.
Transport also, like, you'd be surprised how many fridges in a grocery store are actually not, like, it might say a number on the fridge,
Oh, you mean like the temperature? Oh,
but the
okay.
deviation inside the actual fridge is much, much worse.
Right. And there's like money on the line, right? If that's not
Money, but also safety, right? Like,
sure, right.
you could get people sick.
Seconds. Yeah.
Same thing with drugs.
Right.
When COVID happened, that drug wasn't stabilized because it got pumped out so quickly.
Yep. Right.
So it was in ice boxes and it needed to be monitored, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to give people bad drugs.
Bad drugs. Yeah.
So that's what Smart Sense does or
Does.
did.
And so you joined them because you also had that experience in the pharmaceutical industry, right? So that was an easy transition or easier transition, right? From there.
Yeah, a little bit there. They also wanted someone who's entrepreneurial but has a finance background. So it kind of all fit together.
And why did you decide to leave them, or what made you step away from that opportunity?
So I think I was there for like 3.5 years, if I
Okay.
remember correctly. And by the end of it, I was reporting to the CEO of SmartSense, and then he retired. And quite a bit of my job was basically being his partner in crime and not in crime, but in action. Uh, so I felt that it was an opportunity to move on with him. I think also before he left, there was this idea that SmartSense would start a VC or a corporate venture arm or some kind of lab where we start testing other startups and become a platform. They've decided to continue that platform approach where now they're inboarding more stuff into their platform, third party hardware, things like that.
Right.
But that corporate venture idea never actually materialized, and I really wanted to start pursuing that piece.
And so then how does Momenta, like the VC firm that you work at currently, how does that come into play?
So I was on the buy side for looking at startups that SmartSense might either partner or buy, and a bunch of Momenta stuff started popping up, and then eventually I was like, okay, let me just talk to the guy who keeps investing in these startups, and that's how I met Ken. And then after I left SmartSense, basically Ken said, hey, does it make sense for you to come on board?
Cool.
Yeah,
And so you've worked
really
at
fun.
Momenta for 9 months now,
About, yeah.
about 9 months. And one of the portfolio companies that you're very involved with is Axino, right?
Yeah.
So why did you decide to pick that company to kind of get more hands on with them?
hmm Yeah, so Axino was one of the companies in their earliest funds, so pretty mature in stage. And I think two things resonated with me. One was they were also on this journey of moving from a consultancy hardware seller into a full SaaS business. So I had some experience there,
Right, making that transition.
right? And then secondly, they do something really interesting, which is they found a way using AI plus sensors to measure the core temperature of products without puncturing them.
Okay.
So SmartSense measures air
Right.
and then derives, okay, the air is at the right temperature, so the core of the food must be at
Must
the
be,
right
yeah.
temperature.
Right.
It's not always the case.
Right. Sure. That could be, yeah.
And then in order to verify that, they have to puncture the
Puncture it.
apple,
Yep.
and you're creating a bunch of waste essentially testing that, right? Because once you puncture an apple, you can't
Can't
like
sell that.
sell it to someone.
Right.
Or you have to do it with steak or fish. That makes it even worse. Um, and also those tests, those core tests that you
Hmm.
do with a manual probe,
Yep.
you can't do it on every product in the store
Sure.
simultaneously every 5 minutes,
Right.
right? You're batch testing.
Yep.
And if you happen to test the yogurt, but actually it was the meat that was bad that day, you didn't find out during your safety testing. Whereas Axino is doing core temp of all your freezers every 10 minutes.
Yep.
And now you're being able to think about the food and not the air.
Right.
or the fridge, right?
So was Axino already part of Momenta's like portfolio
Hmm.
companies when you joined?
Yeah, they're one of the
Earlier
earliest
one of the ones. Okay.
investments.
So you kind of came
I
on.
think 2018. No, 2021. Yeah,
Oh, so it's still fairly new.
fairly new, but old for startup world.
Sure. Right. And when did you guys invest into Axino specifically? Were you guys like early on with them as well, or was it just early in the fund?
Yeah, good question. So I didn't invest, right? I wasn't
Right.
there, but I think Ken saw opportunity. Uh, the company was getting spun out from a larger company that was more consultancy driven, and Ken helped basically start that process up of turning it from a piece of a consultancy into a full fledged startup.
So I'm sure you've probably heard, but like with the recent developments of AI, how do you see that impacting like your current like line of work? And also like I mean, obviously you've probably seen a lot of pitch decks come across your desk with AI
Yeah, yeah,
on every second page. How do you see that kind of impacting like the venture capital space?
yeah. Good question. So AI has been around for a long time.
Right.
People are just have found a way to visualize what AI does to the average person in a good way, in a hands-on way, right?
Right.
But like when I think about AI, I don't necessarily think about ChatGPT or generative AI. I think about uh, a little bit different. Like for example, a system that can dynamically in real time change how a concrete plant is working, right? Not like generating a picture or generating text. So it's similar in a way, but I don't think most people think about AI in that way. And that's mostly what we see. So some kind of co-pilot or something that's acting dynamically as a partner to a human. Uh, I think that's really interesting.
So you kind of talked about like what you do earlier.
Hmm.
What do you currently do at Momenta? Specifically, like do you do like deal flow analysis with them?
End to
Um,
end. So
end to end everything.
from sourcing all the way to execution.
Execution.
Yeah.
And so
Momenta's really team based. So that's really nice. We all have expertise in operations in some way, usually in manufacturing or some kind of physical space industry. So everyone kind of knows, is an expert at it and knows what they're talking about. A lot of times when we talk to startups, they're like, oh, wow, the VC's never asked me that before because
right,
we ask them more practical questions, I would say.
industry specific, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense. So I'm sure a lot of finance students are going to be listening to this and
Hmm.
asking specifically like what can they do to stand out, right? So you didn't pursue an MBA, right? You kind of had to stick out of the masses.
Yeah.
How would you recommend a student or finance student to do that?
Well, I didn't pursue MBA because there was never a reason to. I never hit a ceiling.
Okay.
So I think you should only pursue an MBA and waste opportunity costs in years, but also what 250K now.
It's quite a lot,
If
yeah.
you hit a ceiling, or if you're in industry, like I have a bunch of friends who are in wealth management, you need certificates, you need an MBA, right?
Sure.
That's just how it progresses. In startup world, it's more about like what you've done or uh, if you've exited or how you've helped a startup grow, right? So if you on your resume have, I got in here when it was 10 people and we grew to 50 and we 10x revenue, that's probably better than any MBA in my industry, at least.
Makes sense.
Uh, in terms of how, what was the question? How finance students
You can like
can
stand out
stand out?
like in an
Um,
application pool,
do things.
do things.
Yeah, have fun. Do things. Like don't just go to class.
Do you think the fact that you were like entrepreneurial from early on, do you think that helped you stand out specifically? It's like, okay, like, I've already had like an exit, even if it was a small exit, or like I've been working on this product on the side has
I
helped you.
think I think there are a lot of people who say they're entrepreneurs who
Mhm.
are full of it. So if you're very young and you use that, even if you're the real thing, it's hard to be taken seriously.
Sure.
So I would try to have that experience, but mix it with something more fundamental that people can trust. And then, like, you shouldn't over index on certain things, right? Like, getting from a 3.5 GPA to a 3.9 takes a tremendous amount of effort.
Sure.
You could probably spend that time in a better way. And I actually know people who reject resumes that have above of 3.7 because they feel like those people have gotten so good at beating the education game that they're no longer able to think independently.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think like if you're young, you shouldn't go 100% in on anything really. You should try to be a more well-rounded person.
Try different things, right?
Yeah. And like I don't know if you've ever done this, but like track a week of your like a typical week and then assign like each hour of the day to what you actually did during that day. And it'll show you really quickly where you're wasting your time and where you're over indexing.
So you mean like in comparison to what you perceive you're
Yeah.
doing?
Like, so do a mental exercise, have like some categories, right? Like
Yep.
uh, development of skills, career, school, physical activities. Before you even start tracking, assign what you would want those percentages to be. Like leisure activity could be there, right? Like time with
Right.
your friends could be
Yep.
there. Uh, Assign what you think those percentages should be optimally, and then track like a few weeks and see how far off you are. And you might realize like, I want to spend only X percent on school, but I'm spending 20% more. And it's causing me to suffer in these three areas that I really care about.
Right. And I'm guessing you did that exercise?
Uh, Personally, yes, but I did the exercise at Smart Sense at a company level.
Okay.
And because everybody's complaining, like, what is that guy doing? Why doesn't he do the work I want him to do? And it's like, yeah, because you drowned him in like 60% of tactical work and you want him to be a strategy guy.
Right.
Well, yeah, obviously he's not doing what you want because you've given him all these tasks that don't achieve the goal you want.
And why do you think people make those statements? Like just lack of
I
empathy?
no, no. I think most of the evil or bad things or just are is just neglect or just not understanding the ripple effects,
Okay.
right? So people are really bad at quantifying like how much something takes, how much time something takes. And they give them like, oh, I just give them these few small things, but when you actually that person adds it up, it ends up being a lot.
Right.
And then once you show the manager, hey, 60% of this guy's work is meetings and tactical, but when you did that assignment, you said you wanted 80% of his work to be strategy. You did this. You assigned him that work, right? Uh, Immediately that changes the manager wants the outcome they want, right? And they're just not realizing that they're mismanaging their employee.
Right.
But we do that as humans in our daily life as well. We mismanage ourselves.
And we kind of talked about some advice for finance students. Would there be anything that you would tell your younger self? Like looking back now, obviously you're pretty early in your career still, and there's
Yeah,
still a lot of things that you will be doing later on.
right. I'm 31 for
31,
reference.
right? Yeah. What would you tell your freshman self specifically?
Yeah, good question. I think so. I really enjoyed physical activity and sports, but I really sacrificed that part in order to achieve in other places. And I would tell my younger self to not do that. Um, just health wise, but also there's a lot of fun in that. There's a lot of networking. There's a lot of character development, and yeah, I think that's the biggest piece.
Sweet.
And then take the hard classes that are fun, like that you find fun, right?
Right.
Like financial modeling is probably not the easiest class, but if you find it. It also, if you take the hardest classes in any subject, you realize if you like doing that, and then you know if that's a career you want to pursue, right? If you take the easiest classes in your major,
Mhm.
you might do really well in that, but you won't actually know that's something you want
Right.
until you go into that field, and then a year or 2 down the line, you're like, "I hate marketing. Why am I here?" So I would just suggest
Well, thank you so much. Um, I appreciate you coming
that.
on. So the Morning Investor does have a weekly newsletter. We send it out every single Monday. We are also going to be inviting other guests on as well. I want to appreciate, thank you again for coming on to the podcast. I
Mhm.
think the message and kind of story was very insightful for people that are going to be listening to this, in the future. Um, yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on,
Yeah,
and
thank you.
appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Glad to help.